have one question for Dr. Nyberg from the audience. You mentioned, do we have, there we go, I can see her now. You mentioned that the virus enters several different types of immune cells. What are the consequences of that? And does that mean that patients who've been infected, particularly multiple infections, are therefore more susceptible for other infections or effects of long COVID, perhaps?
So that's a very good question. And I don't think anyone at this point can give a certain answer to that question, but there is evidence that the immune system goes through changes for quite some time after COVID-19 infections. We can see that on T cells, on the number of T cells, the different T cell populations, and other measures. And the one study I mentioned about monocytes, you could see that at the time of the study period of the study, they could see that 6% of the monocytes were actually dying from this infection. So, and we don't know yet what that means in the short run or in the long run. And but there are some signs that it might lead to people being more susceptible to other infections. But for the long run, we really don't know anything about it yet. But there might be effects.
Thank you. I have a question that perhaps each one of the other speakers, Dr. Kane, Dr. Tamara, and Dr. Tyler, could answer each one. It's for patients suffering from long COVID who do not possibly have access to those tests that are not regular, like the fancy scans that you mentioned, the biomarkers or blood work that most people don't have access to. What is your top advice to them as to what they can do, what they can ask, how they can better educate the physicians to help them?
Do you want me to kick off with that? So I think one of the key abnormalities that we are seeing in a lot of long COVID patients, as Dr. Taylor said, nearly 50% will have this autonomic dysfunction. And a really good measure of that is something we call heart rate variability, which can be measured quite easily with a number of different gadgets that are already out there. And there's some really good videos on physios for ME. I mean, the ME community have known about this for a long time, and we're learning so much from people with ME CFS. And so I think in terms of that pacing and not getting into that boom or bust, using heart rate variability and to manage exercise levels and to manage fatigue with pacing is a really good idea. And also anything that will help stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system, like meditation, breath work. That's all very, very good for people with long COVID, but I'll let others speak.
Dr. Tamago?
I agree. One of the programs that was available at Mount Sinai is a breathwork program called Stasis. It's part of the rehabilitation program there. And I was an early person in the rehab program because I was in the first wave essentially. And I was taken to the hospital and admitted 3 times from physical therapy. And and I wasn't really doing anything profoundly taxing, but the doctors here will understand. One of them, I had to put a ball up a wall, having my hands over my head, and I just went down. And another was getting up from lying down. And I became very disoriented and I looked apparently very odd, and they ended up calling a code on me and taking me to the hospital. So I think letting people know about how important the pacing is. Most people don't understand that. They think they should be, and physicians have said that, and I've been told by a cardiologist that I should just get back to running like I used to. And I just laughed. I'm like, golly, I can't go up the stair steps. I can only do 2 steps at physical therapy. I can't imagine. I can only stand up for 6 minutes. What in the world and are they thinking? So they're just not COVID aware. So I share with other long haulers, ask for COVID aware physicians. And my physician, my primary care doctor, who was my second because I had to fire my first, has stayed with me the entire time. Even when I was in New York, we had a weekly video session, and he has kept contact with me this entire time. And so when I went to see him the 1st of January, that Monday after the New Year, he said, "Oh my gosh, you need to go to the hospital," because he had been seeing me and knew that I was in trouble. So I think having a COVID aware physician, if you don't have one, try to find one. The resources on Survivor Corps for that, on Mass Together America, and all of these docs that are here, Dr. Taylor, Dr. Kane, Dr. Nyborg, they're on Twitter and Facebook, and they're posting things. So they will help you find a COVID aware physician near you. And whether it's in the United States, the UK, or wherever you are in the world.
I'd like to give Dr. Taylor, if you wanted to comment on that question. Any guidance or tips for patients who don't have access to all of the more research focused, the access tests, complex tests?
Okay. Well, I have to say most of my patients haven't had any complex tests actually, and I've seen what some of the stuff that's done in the States compared to here, and it's a huge difference. And I think you can do your own stand test. So if your doctor doesn't know about POTS, for example, show them what happens to you, and don't let them tell you that it's not POTS. Show them a graph. If you can, do something to show them this is what's wrong with me. And I know it's difficult to advocate for yourself when you're not well, but maybe take somebody with you if you've got somebody that can come with you. And I think, like we said, seeking out people that do know if you can lobby sort of MPs. In America, it might be congressmen, is it? And Facebook groups and things can be really good for patients who don't know what they need. For example, if do you need a complex test, or what do you need? So I would say to make use of all of that sort of thing as well.
Thank you so much. And we have many more questions, but we have to move on to the next session. We have captured the questions, so we can always share them later. Thank you, everybody. Katie, and thank you for incredibly wonderful yet horrifying talks. But we need to know this information, and I'm glad you guys are sharing it. So I have a question for Professor Irving. The brain effects that you describe, do they get progressively worse? Do we know yet? Are they similar to what we see in other neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, where patients get progressively worse and there's not a lot we can do? Or do we have any data yet on that?
We're early in the game, but I mean it's likely that they're getting worse. It's some of them are getting worse and some are getting better. Okay, but we don't really know. But I mean, the brain is depending on what happens in terms of damage, it doesn't repair. So some things can be compensated, but you're not going to repair. If you've got protein tangles forming in the brain during COVID, this is something that's going to show up years or decades later. But I mean, we're talking about having 30 and 40-year-olds with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease. And this is there's already a lot of anecdotal reports from neurologists saying that they have an uptick in the number of people they're seeing in their early 40s, let's say, with Parkinson's or early Alzheimer's. And so Parkinson's is a little bit more controversial. There's a beautiful paper that just came out on looking at the different variants and the different aspects of what's happening, at least psychiatrically, are dramatically different between the variants, and so it just shows you how complicated it's going to be. But I think probably some part of it will be progressive and get worse, and some part of it will level out and not be so bad. I don't know. I think Professor Duncan's talk was much more scary than mine.
Yeah, so I wanted to come to
You're scaring the hell out of me.
Dr. Duncan. So some of the very concerning cardiovascular and thrombotic effects that you described, we have a question from the audience: are those likely to also appear in children, and have you seen them in your own practice in pediatric cases?
So the first thing I would say is I am not a pediatric cardiologist. I am an adult cardiologist, but I do some work with the Long COVID Kids charity. It's a bit early to say yet. We are involved in sorting out a trial in children to look specifically at endothelial abnormalities in kids to see how prevalent they are, because we don't know that yet. There is some anecdotal evidence from colleagues of mine in Germany who have looked at a few children, suggesting rather concerningly that there may be some issues with endothelial dysfunction and similar pathophysiology to we're seeing in the adults with microclotting, etc., which is obviously very concerning, and which is why I'm a very big proponent of clean air in schools, because I do not want our kids to be repeatedly infected every 3 to 6 months with this illness and end up potentially, and we don't know this for certain, but with blood vessels of a 90-year-old by the time they're 40.
Yeah.
So thank you, and we will look for the new research. And actually, to do with that, it seems from all of your presentations that we need to expedite the research to get more information. Dr. Banerjee, do you have any suggestions on how we could expedite that research? How can patients get involved in the clinical trials? How can we increase international collaboration to expedite the much needed data?
Yeah, I can tell you, as we're going through it. We've started our trial in various sites around England, and the barriers are similar to pre-COVID research. The delays in getting access to data, delays in approvals, and delays in getting sites started, and of course we need to have more funds and more priority given to long COVID research, because acute COVID research was a public health priority and was prioritized above other health research. But by the time people woke up to long COVID, the same speed has not been given to pushing long COVID research through. So I think, as I say, funding and priority is important. I think also that we need to remember that even with more money and more resource, it does take time. And anybody who tells you they understand everything and have got the cure for this is selling you snake oil, because it is complicated. Even the studies that we've been doing observationally, we need to have data ongoing, 1 year, 2 years. We need to make sure we scan the different organs. We need to look at the brain. In our cover scan study, we couldn't comment on the brain because we scanned all the other organs. So we need to, as scientists, accept what we know and what we don't know. And as clinicians, we need to be pragmatic and get more done. But I think there are more and more trials starting. If, as a patient, I hope that we do more collaboration across countries so that everybody has access to those trials, because one thing that has been a side effect of allowing infection to affect our health system so badly is that even within my research team, the research nurses and clinicians at the different sites, they've been affected by COVID and long COVID, and that's actually delaying our capacity to do this research. So at no stage and in no circumstance is a high infection rate good for anybody. It is a lose-lose-lose scenario, even for research. And I would love to study long COVID quickly and get more patients into my trials, but the ideal would be to not have patients to bring into trials. And we seem to be trying to create this disease burden.
Thank you. And we could take so many more questions, but we're going to have to move on to our next session.
Dr. Geraldine Hamilton.
Okay, let's get started. We have several questions for the speakers. Thank you for your talks again. Professor Pretorius, your data seems to clearly indicate the impact on platelets. These are cells in our bloods that are very important in the regulation of blood clotting, and they've been implicated in inflammation and so forth. Can you relate for us how this impact on platelet function relates to some of the brain and cardiac effects that we heard from speakers earlier today?
Platelets, they are central when you look at blood clotting, and they also form complexes within cells when they're damaged, and they can form complexes with immune cells as well as endothelial cells. We believe that in long COVID and acute COVID, but obviously we're talking about long COVID here, there are widespread systemic inflammation of the endothelial layers. And if that happens, the platelets will react to these damaged cells. Endothelial cells, damaged endothelial cells, will produce molecules, inflammatory molecules in cells. Platelets themselves are potent signaling entities. If we have this widespread endothelial damage, it will not only affect the periphery, but it could possibly affect the whole system, the whole vascular system, which also has an impact in the brain. And we know that LPS, which molecules produced by various bacterial wall products, they can damage the blood-brain barrier. And then damage can happen via the blood-brain barrier, which is nothing else but a vasculature. So platelets are central in driving vascular damage as well as pathological blood clotting, which involves the plasma proteins. You are muted.
You must be muted.
I'm muted. It had to happen at least once during the whole event, of course. And the next question is for Professor Scheibenbogen. I don't think I pronounced that right. Please do correct me. The question is regarding the G protein coupled receptors that you mentioned. You stated that these antibodies that are associated with symptom severity for long COVID. Do you think they offer the potential for development of a biomarker, i.e. things we can easily measure in the blood? Can they be measured in a clinical setting right now? And could they offer a possibility for therapeutic development, which we realize even if they do, it would take a long time, but are these feasible?
Yeah, thanks for this important question, and you perfectly pronounced my name. Actually, we tested in the study the diagnostic suitability, and by combining several antibodies, we can reach a quite good diagnostic accuracy. But as this was only a small cohort, we definitely need to analyze larger cohorts to see if this holds true before we can think about developing this as a diagnostic test. Regarding therapy, we in the past did already trials targeting autoantibodies in post-infectious ME/CFS. So we did trials with high-dose IgG and with immunoabsorption. That's a technique with which you can wash out all immunoglobulins. In patients with ME/CFS, we observed a rapid symptom improvement using this technique. These were, however, only 2 small studies, and the planned larger study we wanted to perform was in 2020. And then the pandemic came and we had to postpone it. But now we started again with immunoabsorption, and we currently do a first trial in post-COVID ME/CFS, and we hope to have first cohort studied end of this year, and this will tell us probably very rapidly which role these autoantibodies or autoantibodies in general do play in these patients, because immunoabsorption usually leads to rapid improvement of disease. Although it's usually not sustained, it would be important to see if we are right with our concept that autoantibodies do play a major role, especially in the subset of post-COVID patients fulfilling ME/CFS criteria.
Thank you. And my next question is for Professor Griffin. So you beautifully described the potential for viral RNA persistence in cells. We see its evidence in other viruses, and this, you suggest that this may be happening too with SARS-CoV-2. I'd like for you to describe how you think that is then linking to some of the inflammatory effects we see with long COVID and potential things that a patient could experience that may reactivate an infection as well.
Well, I think that the fact that the RNA is around, and although there's been controversy over whether the actual virus could continue to could reactivate and become infectious again, I think that most of the evidence is that protein is being made, and that's what the immune system is going to be responding to. And so both the production of and stimulation of immune responses that can be local. I think one of the things that we don't really have a good handle on for long COVID and the potential for a viral RNA to be driving many of the symptoms, which can include the abnormalities with the endothelial cells and platelets, and actually as a scenario for producing autoantibodies because of the dysregulation of the immune response that's likely to be happening in local tissue, and people have looked mainly in the respiratory tract, which makes sense. But I think there's a lot of evidence that this is a systemic disease in many people, and the sites where the stimulation is ongoing, I think, is not clear, and that's hard if you're studying people who are alive and having particular symptoms. To sample lots of sites is difficult. I mean, it's prohibitive. So I think we have to look for other evidence that that's the ongoing process, and it would lead to the possibility that antivirals would be useful late. I don't know those things, but I think there are trials, or there are likely to be trials to at least look at that. But right now, finding some evidence that this is a likely driver for many of the late consequences, I think, is the important thing. And I'll emphasize the need for research.
Yes, indeed, and funding for that.
And funding, right, absolutely, absolutely, right.
All right, thank you very much, everybody, and we will be moving on to our next session. Thank you.
To our final question and answer session. So I'm going to bring back Maddie and Cecile to join Yanir and with our moderator, Dr. Geraldine Hamilton, to conclude our question and answer session.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So this first question is for Dr. Haino. What ways can people move towards this transition where we get them to recognize long COVID and that we require action? Are there things that we can do to alter behaviors as individuals or as a society? No, it's a tough question.
Yeah, that's a pretty broad question. Maybe one thing worth mentioning about it is that if we have a huge amount of people. And then if we put out a message and everyone in within that group knows that everyone else has got that message. But if everyone else can also observe that none of the people who have got the message are actually acting according to that message, then we really risk a sort of a backfiring effect in the sense that if you, for example, if there's a mask mandate, and everyone can see that no one is wearing masks, then everyone can look at everyone else and thinking, oh, well, actually, it doesn't seem that much like masks are needed. So another option to doing that, like putting all the awareness in first, is to actually work with smaller communities and businesses and do work within those, like little by little, and this creating the best practices and learning as we go, and like going one network forward every time, and trying to bring forward the larger scale change in that way.
Thank you. Dr. Philippe, if you were a business leader, again, another tough question, you guys get all the tough ones. If you were a business leader, a business owner, or a venture capitalist investor, what would be your main concerns regarding what you've heard here today?
My main concern now would be that I do not want to get COVID. And because actually cognition and cognitive impairment it seems to be one of the big issue, and those people, you know, they work from, or almost essentially from their cognitive abilities to solve very, very fast problem that others are not able to solve. And so I would first take measures in order to protect myself. But because I'm a venture capitalist, I'm looking for the most talented people. And actually, if I strongly believe that they are like an engine within the system, and that actually one of the main issues today is to find those most talented people, and they are few and they are scarce. I do not want the pool to be even scarcer. So I would start trying to think about this long COVID issue, not only in the way that you know, we often hear that we need to accommodate. I think really, I mean, what Janja said, and I mean, is absolutely essential. We at the individual level can take some measures, but some others have to be taken at the societal level. You know, like quality of air in schools. I did not mention it in my talk, but this is you know, we invest billions of dollars in the education of our kids. Why? Because we think they are the future. They are building the society of the futures. And the huge paradox is that we think that they are not going to be impacted by long COVID, even though they are younger, so they will get infected more often if we do not take any measures. So air quality, masking, if air quality is not good enough. I mean, there are so many things that we can do. And with vaccines together and all the new technologies, I mean, they can really work together so that because one thing is also to preserve our liberties, to preserve what we care, which is actually to be able to interact. You know, that's what I was saying. Interaction are absolutely essential. And if we want to preserve, we need to create those ecosystems where actually we feel safe to interact and we do not contaminate others.
And Yanir, would you like to comment on that question too?
Sure. I think that this idea that people who value their own cognitive abilities should be the ones who are, of course, making sure that they're not infected is clear. But any business owner or leader has to be concerned about the key people that are working in their companies, or, as Cecile mentioned, the people that they would like to hire as the talent to be the engine in their companies. And so taking precautions in a corporate context to protect their most important asset makes sense. People are worried about the structural integrity of their infrastructure, but surely making sure that their talented workers, and everyone's cognitive abilities are important. But of course, there are the diversity of capabilities means that many specific capabilities are important, and that's essential to protect in the context of a modern economic activity, surely very different from our expectations about industrial era production lines, but in the context of the workforce disability that Cecile talked about, it impacts even the production lines and the supply chains at their most basic level, and then definitely it impacts the high cognitive roles that are generally present in today's economy.
Thank you. And I know we're over time, but I have an important question from the audience that I will pose to all three panelists. How can we help kids that are still going to school wearing their masks, but they might be the only ones in the entire school or in their classroom? Are there any tips to help them cope in that situation and to help them continue to wear their mask successfully?
I think Maddie may have more to add, but I think one of the things is clearly to create the understanding that people should care about each other, and if someone would like to wear a mask, they should be encouraged to wear the mask that they want to wear for their own safety. And the first question in terms of social pressure is the acceptance of the right or the freedom of individuals to protect themselves in this kind of a context and to protect their families, their loved ones. So whether children are wearing the mask for themselves or protect their parents or grandparents, or whether parents are wearing masks to protect their children, the siblings, cousins, all of those should be understood as a part of what we do for each other, and an essential part of how we respond to an infectious disease that can cause problems both in the acute phase and, as we've learned today, so much in the long COVID part of the infection.
Cecile?
Yes, I'm going to tell you what we do, because we are a family of 4 and 2 young kids at school, and they wear the mask at all times. And it's not been easy, but the way they are doing it is that they explain to people who ask, because they ask always, and sometimes they are even harassed by some people. And it has worked. It has worked, and especially this year, they are not in trouble anymore. They are telling people, I do that in order to protect my parents. And that, I guess the communication can change, depending on where people are. But right now in France, they are telling something that is true, which is that they are doing and they are protecting their parents. And as parents, we've been speaking to everyone, to the teachers, to the people in all school. We've been going to them. We've been telling them why we do that, and that's how this year they are completely accepted and not putting, in those conflicts where one adult is telling them that they have to take their mask off. So,
any last comment, Matty?
Yeah, my kids are happily not yet school age, so but yeah, I guess an important thing is that as Cecile said, to like to develop those. I spoke about the relationships and the trusting relationships within your community and with people you don't necessarily see eye to eye on stuff, but it's of course easier to say than actually do. But I think it's super important to actually speak to people and have them understand that your situation may be different from theirs, and you're okay with them doing what their thing, and if they're okay with you doing you. And like something that Janir said made me think of like, you know, there used to be a time where if you were a woman and you wore pants to school, people were like, hey, why you get? Can't you just like wear a dress like everyone else? Why do you need to come to school if you have to wear pants? So I guess it's that much different from that. I don't.
Thank you.
It can't be that much different.
I want to share a great comment from one of our previous speakers, Dr. Duncan. She says that we all parents and all of us who have kids in our families and others should really campaign for leaders to invest in clean air in schools to really protect our children. And that's so important. That's something each and every one of us can do. And I can tell you that even one school can make a difference because I've done it. So I highly encourage you to do it. And with that, I'm going to, so now for bringing the meeting to a close, it has been an incredible event. It has also highlighted the importance of creating awareness on the long-term impacts and risks of long COVID. We cannot allow people to continue to get infected multiple times with a virus that can severely impact, as we have heard today from our speakers, key organs such as the cardiovascular system, the immunological system, and our neurological system. This virus leads to chronic disease and disability, and acute events like heart attacks, strokes, pulmonary embolism. This is simply not sustainable. These acute events can also lead to disabilities and deaths over the long term. Long COVID impacts the quality of our lives, our ability to work, our ability to innovate, and to problem solve. We must act now to protect our fellow humans, to protect our society and the economy. And there are multiple ways that we can do that. We are not helpless. We need to care for one another. The solutions are in our hands. This is not actually held back by the biology of this disease. It lies in our individual and societal action. We need to adopt the tools and technologies that we have, as well as new ones that will come along to help protect each other and to help those suffering. Thank you.